I'm sorry to say it, but Aelin should have killed him, and we will talk about it when we get there. But Aelin's not wrong. Okay, Aelin, defender here. Okay, she should have killed him.
My, how the turntables. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Book Dump Fantasy Podcast. We, Addison and Lorraine, are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Welcome back for Queen of Shadows, Episode 3. Today, we are deep diving into chapters 14 through 21, and it's finally the big rescue day. And damn, if it wasn't a tense and exciting set of chapters.
It really was. That's kind of what I expected, but also it went very differently than how I thought it was going to go. But I am happy to say that Aedion and Aelin are alive for now.
Heavy emphasis on for now.
Yeah. As for Dorian, ugh.
Yeah, just very worried for him. But in terms of the witches, we also get some very interesting time with Manon and Alid, which has left me with many questions along that route. So
I know. I'm really enjoying all the Alid time. She's growing on me very rapidly. Actually, that's one of my overarching thoughts.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Well, as a quick reminder, we will be discussing chapters 14 through 21 specifically, but it is likely that references to all the books we've covered so far will come up. This includes Tab, TOG, Com, and Hoth. If you haven't finished these books and you don't want spoilers, please pause here and then come back when you're caught up. Otherwise, the series is brand new to us, so you won't be getting any spoilers for the rest of the series, but you will be getting plenty of unhinged theories. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have explicit conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. First, if you are reading along with us, then next week's Queen of Shadows episode will cover chapters 22 through 27. In addition, we do have a couple bonus episodes we want to give everyone a heads up about. We went to go watch the new Wiccan movie, and we do have a bonus episode just giving our general thoughts and opinions about it. So go check that out if you have not already. It was honestly a really great movie, and I really enjoyed it, and we cannot recommend it enough. Also, with the holidays upon us, we thought it'd be fun to do a holiday Ask Us Anything episode. So if there are any questions you want to know, either podcast related or just for holiday fun, then please send us a text or an email with your questions. And speaking of the holidays, it is Thanksgiving week in the US, but wherever you are and whatever you celebrate, we hope everyone has a really great week. Next, Addison, where are we at with the Onyx Storm countdown?
Today is November 26th, and there are 55 days until Onyx Storm is released. So go ahead and pre-order your copy now and start rereading Fourth Wing and Iron Flame to prepare. As we talked about in our Onyx Storm excerpt episode, we will be recording and releasing 2 episodes, just reviewing and recapping Iron Flame Part 1 and Part 2. It will be a little different than our deep dive format, but we will be doing that in preparation for Onyx Storm's release.
Finally, we would like to take a moment to express our gratitude to everyone for listening. As much work as this podcast is sometimes, it's really exciting to know that there's a growing community of people out there that take 2 to 3 hours of their week to listen to us yap about these books. But of course, that is the exact reason we put so much effort into making these episodes as great as possible for everyone. With that being said, the one thing we would like to ask of you is to please take a moment to leave us a review or rating and spread the word to anyone you want to convince to read the TOG series with us.
Recently, we've also received a lot of texts with just your thoughts and responses to the episodes that have been released. And we so appreciate it. And we love it so much, even though one of the texts was agreeing with something Lorraine said and not what I said. That's still fine. We still enjoy seeing them. And we just love hearing from you guys, and we love hearing your feedback. So if you have sent us a text, thank you. Please keep doing so. And if you have not, then please send us a text. Whatever platform you listen on, if you go to the episode description at the bottom, there's a hyperlink that says send us a text. And if you click it, it should open automatically to a text that we will receive directly. Although, to clarify, we cannot respond that way. We can only read them. So if you would like us to respond, then you can DM us or email us.
Retweet. Okay.
We do have a
All
Twitter,
right.
actually. So if
I
you
know,
want to
we
tweet
just
us, you can.
we don't use that very often, though. So
There's too many platforms out there.
I know. Social media wise, the most accessible ones that we are on frequently is either TikTok or Instagram. So those are preferred. But anyways, that is all for housekeeping. So let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report for chapter summaries, and then we will dive into an analysis and offer theories for each chapter. And finally, we will share our favorite moments. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
Happily. Chapter 14. Chaol, Nezrin, and Aelin sat together on a rooftop overlooking the square that housed the butchering blocks. Chaol and Aelin bickered about the upcoming rescue plan, and word bless Nezrin for reminding them that they weren't enemies. The three engage in a rescue mission of the 3 prisoners and manage to save 2. Chaol ushers them to the docks and gets them a boat to safety. Later on, Nezrin meets him there to report on the aftermath and tells him she will inform the family of the prisoner they were not able to save because it reminded her of what she had to lose if they failed or if she was caught. After the rescue, Aelin did not go to the docks with Chaol. She instead studied the maps Arobin had given her and did some reconnaissance of her own, which of course ended in her killing about a dozen of the king's guards. The next morning, she checked and rechecked her outfit, making sure everything was there where she needed it to be. She let each step remind her of her plan, anchor her, and then she went to save her cousin, aka Addison's boyfriend.
Aedion. Although maybe not anymore, because
I saw that note, and how dare you? I saw that. I almost considered just ending the podcast right then and there for spewing those blasphemous words. Whatever. I will ignore that. Chapter 15. Aedion tried his hardest to die, but despite his best efforts, he was unsuccessful. They washed and scrubbed and shaved Aedion. After all, they wanted him to look presentable before they separated his head from his body. They led him to the platform where he was to be executed and chained him to the floor. After that, it was just a matter of finding the right moment to meet the end of his own choosing. Chapter 16. The demon made Dorian sit on the dais on a throne. It had broken a little farther through the barrier today. Perhaps the world deserved to be devoured by that thing. And maybe it was that traitorous thought alone that had caused such a hole to rip in the barrier between them. Maybe it was winning. Maybe it had already won. Aelin's costume itched like hell. Aelin played her role perfectly, the role of a trembling novice, an understudy just lucky to be there, for her shot to perform for the King of Otterlin. Aelin and Madame Florine have a brief and quiet conversation about the plan, and just when things seemed ready, Aelin realized there were word marks on the entrances to the glass castle, even in the windows. Thinking quickly on her feet, she made a big show of another dancer hitting her. After getting Florine's attention and demanding a bucket of water, she nudged Florine to the front of the line. After passing the guard, Aelin tripped, and the water spilled, washing the word marks away. And then she was finally in the glass castle. Chapter 17. Aelin prepared herself for what she was about to do, only getting a little distracted by the scent of delicious food wafting towards her as the kitchen servants carried tray after tray into the ballroom. Madame Florine passed out the black glass flowers to all the dancers except Aelin, telling her to watch and learn. Aelin continued to play her part, ducked out of line, and went to Florine's side. The two had an absolutely gut-wrenching conversation about the past and the future, and Madame Florine became the hero I didn't know I needed. And then it was time. Aedion watched the dancers, realizing they were playing the parts of Death's handmaidens. He took it as a sign and smiled to himself. Death was death. It wasn't until a lone dancer caught his eye and he tracked her movement across the room, saw her change her outfit and pretend to be an aristo man, that he realized it was Aelin. The disguised dancer made their way closer and closer to Aedion's stage, and then the dancers shattered their roses on the floor, and Aedion grinned at his queen as the entire world went to hell. Chapter 18. Time passed so slowly and so quickly. Each strike of the clock marked Aelin's next movement. Everything went just as she planned, from the black smoke that made it impossible to see and unlocking Aedion's manacles to yelling "Fire!" to create panic and trick the guards into washing away all the word marks. By the 12th strike of the clock, Aelin and Aedion had made it to the castle gardens. The only thing that stood between them and freedom were 6 guards that Aelin easily dispatched, at least until Aelin heard the sound of gravel crunching and found Dorian strolling towards them. Chapter 19. Aelin confronts Dorian, or rather the Valk prince that inhabited his body. The Valk sent several blasts of magic at Aelin, but thankfully the word marks she had so carefully inked on herself protected her. But the protection was fleeting. She then cleverly drew a word mark in blood, trapping Dorian, and drew her ancient blade. She prepared herself to give the killing blow, but was stopped when an arrow flew and knocked the blade out of her hand. It was fired by none other than our very own Nezran Philique. Realizing she couldn't waste another precious moment on Dorian or Nezran, she grabbed Aedion, and they ran. The race was on. Every moment, every heartbeat risked their discovery. Aelin and Aedion made their way through the city pretending to be drunk revelers. They made it to Lysandra's carriage, and Aelin shoved a massive Aedion into the underseat compartment and quickly disguised herself. They were stopped by the guards, but somehow managed to not get caught. They continued, stopping only to switch carriages with Chaol, and then walked the rest of the way to her apartment. Together, they hauled a massive and hurt Aedion into the apartment. Did I mention how massive Aedion is? Okay, good. It's only because Aelin says it like 6 times how massive he is. Lysandra began to tend to Aedion, and Aelin headed straight for the bath. After she was cleaned up, she and Chaol, surprise, surprise, had another argument over Aelin's attempt to kill Dorian. She tried to make Chaol understand that Dorian was gone. The argument ended quickly with Chaol going to take the first watch, but then Aelin heard Lysandra ask what the hell Chaol meant by calling her queen. But Lysandra had known for quite some time who she really was, and frankly, she didn't care. She would not go bowing and scraping, because where would the fun be in that? Chapter 20. Aelid Lochan was going to escape. At least she planned to. Aelid was sent to deliver a letter to Manon and went to the area to find her. She thought about her past and everything that had led her here to Morath, and how her nursemaid Vanilla had taught her to sharpen every tool in her arsenal. She was interrupted from her thoughts when Manon arrived. Manon told her to cut the bullshit and stop pretending that she was a scared little girl. As Aelid prepared to leave, Abraxos, that big scary puppy with wings, seemed to take an interest in Aelid, which Manon chastised him for later. Aelid left, and after reading a scathing letter from Granny Blackbeak, Manon took to the skies to help shake off the echo of the dead Kraken witch's words in her mind. You were made into monsters. Made. Later on, Manon goes to Ghislaine's room, one of the 13 who was wicked smart, and asks her to tell her about the Valg. She gives us a download about them, and unfortunately for us, it wasn't really anything we didn't already know, but hey, it's a start. At breakfast the next day, a Yellowlegs coven leader asked Manon to be selected for the Duke's experiment, and Manon reluctantly agreed, thinking that it was better for it to be the Yellowlegs than the Blackbeaks. After informing the Duke, she questioned the purpose of all of this and couldn't help but notice when the Duke said, "This world had too long dwelled in ignorance. Not this land or this continent, but this world." Manon wondered if her grandmother had ever considered the idea that they might one day have to fight to keep the waste. Fight the very men who had helped them take back their home in the first place. Chapter 21. Dorian, still trapped in his own mind with the Valg Prince, had sobbed with relief when the girl with turquoise eyes had trapped the evil thing and raised an ancient blade over his head. But then she had hesitated, and that other woman had fired an arrow, and she had put down the sword and left him trapped with the demon. He wished she had killed him. He hated her for not killing him. And that concludes the book report on a very somber note.
That ending with Dorian, I was like, oh no, he actually didn't want to be killed.
All of his chapters are so devastating. Every time I see a really short chapter, I'm like, oh, it's going to be Dorian again.
Hopefully they get him out soon, because I don't know how much longer he's going to last.
I believe I have that in the notes several times. Every time we talk about Dorian, I'm just like, the clock's ticking.
All right. Well, thank you for the book report. Now let's get into the analysis, starting with overarching thoughts.
Yay! These are pretty short and simple, so I'll just get straight to the point. I first started with, wow, this was really an exciting set of chapters. There was a lot of action, and to be honest, I cannot freaking believe they made it through all of this. I really, truly cannot believe they actually managed to rescue Aedion and didn't get caught. And I can't believe they actually got away without having to kill Dorian. That was really best case on all fronts. And then my second overarching thought is, I just want to say that Aelid's character is really growing on me. I am really liking her, and I really cannot wait to see where her story goes and how she fits into the story in the big picture sense. I think she's going to be really interesting.
I think so too. I made a note about this later, but a lot of her thoughts do seem very familiar to how Manon thinks. Once you started reading like how she picked up on things and everything, I felt like there was a lot of similarities, which of course makes sense because we learned that she has witch blood in a way. but just her whole interactions with Manon too. I get the growing feeling that Aelid's going to stick around. I don't think Manon's going to do anything to her because I think if she wanted to, she would have. We'll see. All right. So starting with chapter 14, Chaol, Nezrin, and Aelin meet on the rooftops around the town square to interrupt the regularly scheduled executions the King of Aederlin conducted daily. They are now one day out from Dorian's birthday / Aedion's rescue mission. We see a continuation of their argument over what to ultimately do with Dorian. The tension is high, with Chaol threatening to botch Aedion's rescue should Aelin mess with Dorian, and Aelin promising in return that if he messed with her court, she would burn him and Aederlin to ash. Again, I think that this is ultimately a really tough question, and honestly, at the start of this set of chapters, I didn't even think we would run into Dorian during the rescue, but this conversation ended up foreshadowing this exact situation later on.
Yep, to a T. Absolutely. It just sucks because I feel like this is really a lose-lose situation. If they keep him alive, they're subjecting him to endless torture. Plus, you have to remember, they don't actually know that he's still in there. Most normal people would probably be long gone by now. I think Dorian is the exception, which I know we've talked about before. And if they let him live, you're keeping a highly dangerous and powerful Valg Prince alive and risking that same Valg Prince taking over the throne. So I'm sorry to say it, but Aelin should have killed him. And we will talk about it when we get there. But Aelin's not wrong. Okay, Aelin defender here. Okay, she should have killed him.
My, how the turntables. I appreciated that Nezrin played the middleman, though, and reminded them that they weren't ultimately enemies.
Yes, I have now decided that I like Nezrin because someone has to keep mommy and daddy from fighting, and it's going to be Nezrin.
Oh my gosh, I know. I don't see this ending between Chaol and Aelin anytime soon. I feel like there's always going to be this tension between them.
No.
Quite a while. Not always, I shouldn't say always, but just like for quite a while, at least until they free Dorian.
You had me at always. I was like, no, not always, because they're going to change so much. They're going to go through so much. Yeah. But you're right. Until something happens with Dorian, whether he is killed or he's freed, either way, he's the tension holding that argument together.
Yeah, and he's kind of the glue, too, because I think Chaol, once his opinion changed, I think it's going to require Dorian's alignment with Aelin for Chaol to kind of get on board, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Unfortunately, everyone is interrupted by the starting of executions ahead of schedule. Chaol, witnessing the execution take place, worries he was an oathbreaker, a liar, a traitor. Chaol was all of those things now, but not to Dorian, never to his true king. And then he decides to tell Aelin about taking out the clock tower to break the king's spell. This was a good personal reminder to me that Chaol's one goal is to free Dorian and ensure he lives. Nothing else really seems to matter to him at this point, and it's kind of the one sliver of himself that he's holding on to because Chaol's whole identity has come crashing down recently, so...
I agree completely. I think he is keeping Dorian alive for two main reasons. One, that's his best friend since childhood, basically his brother, so there's a lot of love there. And two, I think that keeping Dorian alive and seeing him put on the throne gives Chaol a route to redemption from being an oathbreaker, liar, and traitor. If Dorian is gone, I think Chaol believes there's no path to redemption and he will have failed in every way possible. And so I think that is why he is so hung up on not only keeping Dorian alive, but seeing him put on the throne.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Aelin thanks him, and they begin discussing the possibility of the king laying wordmark traps around the castle. This, of course, is direct foreshadowing for the rescue mission later. I did appreciate that Chaol is trying to help Aelin in this case by giving her the magic books he had taken from her room.
Yes, that was very nice of him. Good job, Chaol. And good on him for remembering to grab them on the way out. Yes. Thank God. Also, I cannot fucking believe it did not occur to her until just this moment that the king would use magic and or word marks to trap her. Like, when she thought that, I was like, fuck. I mean, I can't believe that I didn't fucking think about that. To be honest, I totally fucking forgot word marks existed. Like, that was such a huge part of TOG and Con. And then we went to Wenland and I was like, word marks? Oh, yeah. What are those?
I know. I feel like I'm so used to the king just using his little Valg infected army people to like sniff everyone out. And so I keep thinking that's what he's going to use. But instead, he also has word marks. And I'm like, oh, shit.
Totally forgot about those bad boys. Yep.
But on the plus side, we do know that they're neutral, right? They're morally neutral. So anybody can use them, which does come in handy for Aelin. And thank God she remembered them and studied them. So
she should have been studying them while she was in Wenland.
I know, for real.
Especially because she knew that when she got there, she wouldn't be able to use her fire magic. So she should have been studying those 24/7. That was really a missed opportunity for her.
Yep, I agree. Shortly after, they've made it down into the square to save who they could from this round of executions. They managed to save 2 men and make it out themselves. When they meet back up by the docks later, Nesrin takes lead on informing the family of the man who had died, and I like that she said, "It reminds me what I have to lose if I'm caught or if we fail." I think that's really important to remember since, as we talked about last episode, if they themselves don't make it, then everything they have worked for gets botched and it goes out the window. And so priority number 1 for them will always be to stay alive first.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. This line also made me wonder more about Nesrin and what her backstory is, and more importantly, what her motivations are in risking her life and the life of her family. Because based on descriptions that we get from Chaol and a little bit Erebin, it seems like her father makes pretty good money. So she's set up relatively well. Like she's comfortable. It's not like they're greatly impoverished and struggling and have been exposed to a lot of the underside of Rifthold. And not that rich people, can't care about the oppression of others. But I'm just saying, like, what has prompted Nesrin to feel the need to risk a relatively good, comfortable life and her family's life as well.
Later on, Aelin trails the king's guards from the rooftops to learn what hidey holes they rushed to, what formations they used, as well as to make sure the maps she'd be given and Erebin's information matched which streets remain unmonitored.
Hidey holes?
Hidey holes.
I know it says that in the book. I know, but it's just funny when I hear you say it. Hidey holes.
Hidey holes. She resolves she'd figure out her plan to free magic after saving Aedion, and then gets to ground level where she is met with a group of the king's guards. Luckily, Aelin was out for bloodshed, and after noting the oily black blood that seeped out of the guards, she continued to unleash her skills, and her wrath became a song in her blood as she ended them. After beheading the guards, she watches for a while to make sure they didn't rise again, before heading back into the alley. So this is interesting because if what she observed is correct, then beheading them does, in fact, kill them. I am still not fully convinced that the Val just disappear, but it is good to know that the bodies don't come back to life somehow for the time being.
Yeah, this is a reiteration of the same conversation we've had. Do you have to behead them? Or can you just stab them? And is it different for a lesser Valg or a Valg prince? My assumption is yes. Where do their, spirits, quote unquote, go after they die? It did make me wonder if she wouldn't have beheaded them, would they have reanimated? Because I'm thinking to Cain, who was likely infiltrated by a lesser Valg, and they stabbed him through the heart. And to my knowledge, he is deceased permanently. So I was like, maybe it was unnecessary to behead them. I don't know. I'm sure this is a conversation we could have a million times, and ultimately we'll just have to wait until they actually fucking explain it in the book. But it did make me wonder.
Yeah. The next morning, Aelin was ready, having stayed up late reading and reciting The Walking Dead. As we see, that book has once again proven to be extremely useful. I would really still like to know where that book came from and how it came to be, since it obviously has all this information about evil, otherworldly creatures and the word mark spells.
Yes, and its overall importance in the Massverse. And that's all I will say. And if you know, you know.
Yes. Okay, that ends chapter 14. Moving on to chapter 15. We get a brief perspective shift to Aedion, who was dressed and taken to a public platform for the birthday event.
I thought the description of this scene was insane Aedion was not fucking around about trying to die to prevent Aelin from risking herself. I don't know why it shocked me to read this, but when they say they even risked shaving him despite his best efforts to slit his own throat on the razor, I was like, holy shit, man, he is fucking committed. And I mean, you gotta love that about him, that he is like, I will do literally everything in my power to die.
Yeah, those were some dark thoughts. I was not a fan.
I mean, yeah, nobody should ever harm themselves. I'm not praising self-harm. I'm just praising his extreme loyalty and devotion to Aelin. So let me just be clear about that.
Ultimately, I'm very glad that it didn't have to go that way. So
same.
Aedion observes that there were guards everywhere, and if the king wanted to set a trap for Aelin, he certainly hadn't bothered to be very subtle about it. He was at least provided a stool to sit on, which he decides would make a good enough weapon when the time came.
Which, foreshadowing, he does in fact use as a weapon.
Ultimately, he resolves that he would let them chain him in shackles, let them put the Sword of Orinth on display a few feet behind him. It was just a matter of finding the right moment to the end of his own choosing. And all I could think about was, hold on, Aedion, it's not time to die yet.
Or ever. What do you mean yet? What's wrong with you?
Okay, yeah, you're right. Sorry.
No, those are my thoughts exactly. You really have to admire his extreme loyalty and dedication to Aelin. I know I've said that before, but it is truly, truly heartbreaking how much he loves her, and I cannot wait for their first conversation. I was very bummed that we didn't get it in this set of chapters, and I guess I should clarify, I mean like a real conversation, not the run for your lives conversation, you know? Right. I want them to actually exchange real thoughts and words, not just like, come on, you massive... What does she call him? A hulking ass? She was like, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was not very nice to him for someone that she worked really hard to save.
It didn't occur to me, but both of them sound, I don't know, both of them were making comments about like how
massive they were.
Yeah, they were. And I was like, are they really? Because in my mind, Aelin's like 5'4" or something, like not super tall. And Aedion's like 6 foot. Maybe, I don't know, probably bigger, honestly.
Well, according to Aelin, he's like a fucking giant. He must be like 7 feet tall. We actually talk about this later. I think you had a note about this, so we'll talk about it more when we get there.
Anyways, I totally agree that I wish we had gotten to hear a real conversation between them, but I suspect that'll happen in the next set of chapters once Aedion is healed up and recovered.
I think so as well.
Because he was still low-key dying.
Yeah, just a little bit.
And that ends chapter 15. Moving on to chapter 16. So we get some perspective from Dorian, who is very much still there mentally, despite how the demon made him sit on the dais next to the man who controlled the demon inside him, aka the king. Dorian notes that the demon had broken a little farther through the barrier, and he was perhaps feeling a bit hopeless at this point. So he thinks perhaps the world deserved to be devoured by the thing. Maybe it was that traitorous thought alone that had caused such a hole to rip in the barrier between them. And I was like, no! I mean, it's good to know that Dorian is still in there, but it is unfortunate that he is kind of thinking what Aelin has realized based off her encounters with Narok and Wendelin. I hope Dorian would still be fighting, but it seems like he's quickly losing belief that they can defeat the Balg.
Oh, absolutely. I think the hopelessness is really starting to set in. I know we talked about this earlier. I really have to wonder how long Dorian has left and what the hell they're going to do. Either they're going to have to rescue him soon, and I mean soon, or the alternative is this entire book takes place over the course of like a month, and they don't save him till the very end, which I was wondering about. Either way, we are running out of time. Judging like by the thickness of the book, they're going to have to rescue him really soon, or like the majority of the book takes place over the next week, which I mean, I guess is possible. It could be a very condensed timeline. All the other books have not quite that condensed, but either way, something needs to be done.
Yes. We shift to Aelin, whose rescue was fully in motion as she stood in line at the side entrance, disguised as one of Madame Florine's trembling novice dancers.
One thing I wanted to note from this conversation is when Florine and Aelin are talking, Aelin says, considering where I was 10 months ago. I'm only noting this here because it's concrete information on establishing a timeline, we have a pretty good working knowledge of how that goes, but that literally means all of TOG, COM, and Heir of Fire took place over the course of only 10 months, which is absolutely insane when you think about it. That's crazy. Yeah. I'm not including Tab in the timeline discussion because we know that's a prequel to the events of TOG. So I'm just the timeline for our series in the sense of the continuous story. So 10 months is crazy.
Yeah, that's a lot quicker than I am imagining it to be.
I know.
So
yeah,
that's shocking. But playing her role as well, Madame Florine approaches and they have a hushed conversation about the adjustments for her costume, which contained a big surprise for later. I am happy to see that Madame Florine is one of the good ones, and we learn that her involvement was tribute to the musicians that had been killed by the king for their support of the Endovier and Calcula slaves when they had performed their songs at the concert back in Heir of Fire.
Yes, and during this conversation, Aelin is commiserating with Madame Florine over the loss of the musicians, and she says, I will miss going to hear him conduct the Stygian suite every autumn. And I noted this for two reasons. The first is, I think this is a music that is mentioned in Tab quite a bit as her favorite symphony and one that she went every year to see with Arabin, is my guess. And second, it has a very unique name. I can only assume Stygian is in reference to the mythical Stygian spiders. So I just thought that was a nice little connection because, I don't know what else Stygian would be in reference to. So a nice little world building plug-in connections. Kind of forgot about those damn spiders. I wonder what they're up to.
That's a good call out, though. I do wonder what prompted them to write a song about the Stygian spiders. But
I think they're mythical. I guess people have to know that they're real because they know that Stygian spider silk exists. That's a known commodity. Most people obviously don't encounter them, but I'm sure they're kind of mythical, otherworldly beings in a sense to them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Nice call out. We get a brief reminder of Aelin's connection to Florine when she recalls how she'd still been allowed to take dance lessons and play the pianoforte at her studio after she paid off her debt to Arabin and left the Assassin's Keep. And there's a thought where she thinks it had been a kindness when Aelin desperately needed one. And I really like that Aelin is slowly but surely making more allies and that she thanks Florine for her kindness and sacrifice, knowing very well what the cost could be to her through this whole rescue mission and just everything that's going on in general with the rebellion against the king. The line progresses and then Aelin sees what was foreshadowed in chapter 14, word marks. They were beautifully rendered to look decorative, but she realizes they'd likely been placed at every door and entrance. I gotta be honest, I am very surprised that this ploy of her faking being hit and needing water worked out. Considering how alert everyone was, you'd think that any disturbance would immediately be investigated, especially when she then splashes the water directly on the word marks and nobody was like, oh, how did it end up directly on the word marks? It was intentional. Honestly, I think the only reason that this all worked out at all was because of Aedion's prayer to Mala. Okay?
Thanks, Mala.
Ass every time, I know.
Oh my God, that's so funny. I will say, yes, absolutely. I was fucking shocked that it worked. I am assuming that most of the guards, and I guess basically everyone, doesn't realize their word marks in the decor. They don't realize they're being washed away because basically only the king knows about them. So, it wasn't as suspicious to them. But even still, any kind of oddity, I feel like they would have been like, hey, what's your fucking problem? Get out of here. You know what I mean?
Right.
And would have raised suspicions. Honestly, on the first read, I was like, what the fuck is going on? Why is she crying? Was this part of the plan? Because it felt improvised. I was really confused. I literally did not get it until the moment she washed them away. And so thank God that word marks can be easily removed. It actually reminded me of in TOG how poor Nehemia was crawling under her bed every damn day and drawing protective word marks. And Aelin would wash them away repeatedly. And I can still picture Nehemia being like, not again, God damn it. And crawling under there and writing them in chalk. Also, just a fun call out to Tab. When Florine is talking, she says that this is one of her dancers, Diana. Just like in the story where she pretended to be Arabin's niece, that is her pretend name, Diana Bracken. And so I was like, oh, wow, that's a really way throwback tab connection. It's mostly in the story with Benzo Donovan, which is
Yes.
the assassin in the underworld.
Underworld, yeah.
So I was like, oh, wow.
I forgot about that. I wonder how she came up with that. Why Diana?
I don't know.
Is it
like Deanna?
Deanna?
Love the Hunt? Oh, maybe. I guess Malo would stand out quite a bit, huh?
Probably. Anyways, okay. Well, that ends chapter 16. That was another quick chapter. Moving on to chapter 17. So one of the first things that I noticed, I just thought it was funny that when they're lining up in the hall, Aelin thinks the guards in every hall watch them like hawks and not the shape-shifting Fae prince kind. I just liked it because it's just a nice reminder that Rowan exists, and I really do hope he comes back into the picture soon. So,
who?
How dare you?
Damn, I really wish that Rowan's form was an owl, so that joke would have been like extra punny. Who?
I know.
Damn his stupid hawk form.
We still have yet to learn who that freaking barn owl is or what it is.
Don't fucking bring that up because it makes me so angry. I know that fucking owl is important, okay? I said it at the end of Heir of Fire, and I just fucking know that stupid owl is important. Man, I want to look it up so bad. I won't. God, it just kills me. I gotta be honest, when I was doing my notes for this episode, it took a lot of my self-control not to just Google how do they save Dorian. Because I just really, really, really want to know, but I resisted.
That's good of you. Thank you.
I did, in service to you guys. Because, the obvious solution is just read faster, but I don't read ahead too far because it's disingenuous to the nature of the podcast. So it's really fucking sucks. We love you guys a lot is what I'm trying to say. Because
thank you for sacrificing.
We say this probably like once every 6 or 7 episodes. If we weren't doing the podcast, Lorena and I would have already finished this series and been on like a second reread by now.
Yeah, absolutely. I would have crushed these books and like
crushed them.
Tops. But anyways, Aelin also takes note of the servants bringing out tray after tray of very enticing food, one of which was none other than Nesryn rushing through with the tray of pear tarts. As Aelin points out later, this was foreshadowed by Erebin with his pear comment at the Assassin's Keep, which went right over my head, to be perfectly honest.
Same.
Did not catch that at all. Didn't think it meant anything.
Fuck those pear tarts, okay? Fuck those pear tarts.
I did also like the metaphors for the dancers representing, handmaidens of death and how both Aelin and Aedion think about that. Obviously, this is foreshadowing for their role in the rescue mission and the subsequent bloodshed that follows as they fight their way out. After handing out black glass flowers to the dancers for their performance, Florine tells Aelin the general was okay and reveals that she'd known who Aelin really was. And I wanted to read the quote because I really resonated with it. It says, "When you shatter the chains of this world and forge the next, remember that art is as vital as food to a kingdom. Without it, a kingdom is nothing and will be forgotten with time. Wherever you set your throne, no matter how long it takes, I will come to you and I will bring music and dancing." Art in any form, whether it's music, art, writing, food, etc., is so important to the heart of a culture, and I appreciate that Florine understands this, probably even more so than Aelin does. I also love that Florine stands with Aelin and what she represents to the world, and I do hope that she does make it to Terrasen one day.
I think about all the time that conversation that Emrys and Rowan had in Heir of Fire, and he's basically like, be nice to her because of what she represents, a better world. And that's what it made me think of too. But I mean, who didn't love this quote? Who did not love it? It literally gave me goosebumps listening to it on the audiobook. I really hope that Madame Florine makes it. I feel like there is some foreshadowing in an earlier chapter that it is likely Madame Florine and her dancers wouldn't make it out of the castle alive. I sincerely hope that is not the case, but we'll see. We'll see. I also loved right before Aelin is about to head into the castle and the performance is about to begin. There's a moment where there's, I think, a lot of double meaning. Madame Florine is walking down the line of dancers, and it says, looking down the line at each dancer, she spoke only when her eyes met Aelin's. Give our king the performance he deserves. And I just love that because, she's like, burn it down, girl. Burn it down. Give our king what he deserves. And I really liked that.
Yes.
You're such a gleeful revenge. You're like, yeah. You're such a happy revenger.
I know, I love that shit. I'm like, get him. It's my favorite thing when revenge takes place. As the dancers head out, Aelin promises to herself that if these were her last moments, then at least she would go down fighting to the sound of exquisite music. It was time. She was fire and light and ash and embers. She was Aelin Fireheart, and she bound for no one and nothing save the crown that was hers by blood in survival and triumph. I just thought that was so powerful. I'm literally picturing a score of really epic music playing in the background, as she like just makes her way into the crowd.
Oh yeah, it's an epic moment. It's a very epic quote, very visually enticing image. You can see it like with their costumes and the dance and the tension. And yeah, I agree.
We changed to Aedion's perspective, which was both sweet and very depressing. Sweet because he's the one about to be executed, and yet he thinks he's in the way of the dancers. And then depressing because, as we said before, he is ready to die. He's like, this is my end, and it's not great. He does quickly take note of a dancer that sticks out from the others and thinks he might not have thought twice about it had she not been taller than the others, bigger, curvier, her shoulders broader. She moved as if somehow rooted innately to the earth. Plus, he also notices her distinct tattoos, even if she attempted to cover them.
Aelin the Giant.
It was just so funny to me reading that because I never really considered Aelin to be ungraceful either.
Right.
Since she'd grown up trained as an assassin, and I figure that takes a certain amount of dexterity of movement and everything. But I guess compared to like trained dancers, I guess those movements would look pretty different, like fighting movements versus dancing movement.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, especially because then when she's training with the assassins, like the silent assassins in the desert.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm imagining, but I imagine it to be so fluid and beautiful fighting, I guess. And so it's
beautiful fighting.
Yeah. And so I think it's funny that Aedion's like, she really sticks out. She does not fit in.
The way he's describing her is like she's like a clumpy ogre. She's just stomping around. She's this giant. And I don't know. I agree. That stood out to me too. I quite literally thought the exact same thing, which I have always pictured her being very fit, not quite petite, but mostly just kind of an average height with a very toned, kind of slim build. I guess just compared to the dancers, she was just bigger. I don't know. It was funny to me too.
He also calls her a swaggering man, parading for the ladies around him.
That's because of her disguise.
I know, but he's making it sound like she's as tall and as big as a man, and I don't think she is, but okay, Aedion. Anyway, right before the glass flowers are shattered, it's noted that a courtier notices Aelin approaching him, but did not cry out in alarm. Instead, he shouted a name, a man's name, and the dancer in disguise turned, lifting a hand in greeting toward the man. I don't know if I'm just dumb, but who do you think was calling to her? Like, what male courtier do we know of currently that knows Aelin and would be in the castle?
I just took it like that person was probably drunk or got confused, and Aelin looked like someone. And so he was like, hey, Jeffrey, over here. And Aelin just played along, is how I took it.
Oh, okay. Just as Aelin approaches the ring of guards, Aedion realizes who she was, and it's noted that he grinned at his queen as the entire world went to hell.
Ooh, what a way to end a chapter. If that did not have you on the edge of your seat, I don't know what would.
I was so excited. Ugh, it was great.
Same.
So that ends chapter 17, moving on to chapter 18. We quickly learned that some of Aelin's money had been spent on purchasing all the reactive powder the dancers had thrown around as dust, and that was inside the now shattered glass flowers. Chaos, of course, erupts, and by the time 4 chimes of the clock had struck, she had torn through several guards and reached Aedion, who, fortunately, was not wearing a black collar around his neck. I found it extremely interesting that she immediately feels a jolt and the burn of blue fire when she comes into contact with Aedion's chains, something the king had spelled specifically for her. Also, the Eye of Elena flares up in response. We do know that Aelin's power manifests as fire, and the only time it's been blue was when she had jumped into the portal in Calm to rescue Chaol and Fleetfoot. I wonder if
Mm.
the king somehow figured out a spell that mimics the magic of whoever it's supposed to work against. This is kind of a crazy thought, but I was just wondering why is blue fire specifically that she feels, when she touches
Yeah.
the chain.
I don't know. The description was notable to me, but I really just took it as this is just magic. I didn't think too
Right.
deeply about the essence of the magic, I guess. But it's an interesting thought.
That's fair.
I don't know.
Aelin then uses her own blood to draw unlocking word marks, which fortunately work as the 7th chime of the clock sounds. I also really like that she puts the Eye of Elena around Aedion and that Hugh reminds her to grab the Sword of Corinth, which is obviously a family heirloom of theirs.
Yes, I was glad that they took the sword as well. To my knowledge, that sword isn't magical or special in any way other than that it belongs to Terrasen and has been passed down from generations. But I do wonder if we will discover it has greater importance throughout the series, sort of like Damaris or Goldrin. Either way, I'm glad they grabbed it because of its sentimental value to Aelin.
They make it to the patio doors, Aelin quickly noting that Aedion was injured, but she yells out fire to rile up the crowds and provide cover for their exit. In the commotion, people also grabbed buckets of water and started throwing them on the flames, which in turn also washed away the king's word marks, which was very clever. Because originally I just thought she was yelling it, and then I saw that part and I was like, oh, okay, that was really smart.
Oh, it was exceptionally clever. I thought she was yelling fire just to create more chaos and panic.
Yeah.
I didn't expect the added element of tossing water. And I was like, that brilliant little minx.
Yep. By the 12th clock chime, they'd reached the entrance of the gardens where 6 guards stood waiting for them. Aelin makes quick work of them as a whirling cloud of death, a queen of shadows, which I loved because obviously it references the title of the book. They race through the hedges, only pausing for her to unlock Aedion's manacles, but before they can continue, they are met with none other than the Valg Prince himself, Dorian. Dun, dun, dun.
What another way to end the chapter. Each one got more and more perilous.
I know, so many cliffhangers. And this moves us right along into chapter 19. Aelin quickly notes the torque collar Dorian wore, and then the Valg Prince strikes with a wave of blackness that shoves her back like a hard, dark wind. I find it interesting that the Valg recognizes the word mark wards that Aelin had spent all morning painting all over herself with her own blood.
Oh, yeah.
I am wondering if word marks in general will play a larger role in helping defeat the Valg. We know now that they can be used to protect against the Valg's power, though, as we see, it's not for a super long time. But I did find it interesting that the Valg knows of them.
Yeah, that is interesting. And also, once again, why did she not use these in Wendelin when she was fighting for Valg princes? She could have spent the days they spent preparing, drawing fucking word marks everywhere.
True.
I'm very annoyed about this all of a sudden.
I know, because it's like, how did you forget about something so freaking useful?
Mm-hmm. I guess the argument to that is that she had a very limited exposure to word marks and probably only memorized a handful, and then she didn't have The Walking Dead. But
True.
I don't know. Still, I wonder. I mean, I know at some point Aelin tells Rowan about the word marks, the word keys, so she tells him the whole story. So wouldn't Rowan know about word marks? I mean, he's like, what, 300 years old?
I don't know.
So why wouldn't he? I don't know. I can't go down this rabbit hole. I'm just going to point it out and then we'll keep it moving.
But now that they have officially used them against the Valg, like in the story and Aelin's refresh herself on word marks, I am hoping that they play a larger role moving forward in their effort to combat the Valg. So,
absolutely.
Aedion points out that Dorian was no longer the prince anymore, but the Valg continues to strike. Fearing they were running out of time, Aelin grabs the Sword of Corinth and urges Dorian to give her one sign that he was in there. Unfortunately, his sapphire eyes were empty, but she pleads one last time to say, Dorian, you are Dorian, as she also secretly traces wordmark symbols with her foot. As tough as the scene was from a reader's perspective and from Aelin's perspective, I really appreciate that she did try to look for signs that he still existed inside. Obviously, that was a huge risk to even give a couple moments pause, considering her word marks were wearing off. And obviously, this is a Valg prince that they are facing.
Yeah, I felt so anxious reading this. I was really afraid they were going to get caught, and then we were going to have to do this whole rescue thing all over again, but with Chaol and, I don't know, Arabin. I mean, who else? I was extremely nervous about that. I was like, oh my God, we don't have time for this. You just gotta go.
I know. Everything was happening within a few seconds, but honestly, it felt like minutes. And I kept thinking, you don't have time for this. Go.
Like, girl, you gotta Geo, get my baby out of there, okay?
Yeah. The demon chuckles, not anymore, but Aelin realizes there was nothing of her friend in that face. No hesitation or twinge of bustle before it lunges at them to freeze in place, thanks to the quick and dirty mark she'd drawn on the ground. Aelin has literally seconds to contemplate the decision where she thinks for Terrasen, for their future, she could do this. She could end this threat here and now. Not one more name would she etch into her flesh, she'd promised herself. But for her kingdom? Unfortunately for the world, but fortunately for Dorian, an arrow fired by Nesryn knocks her off balance. Nesryn states Arabin had warned them Aelin would try and kill Dorian, which immediately reminds her of Arabin's comments about Nesryn's father making the best pear tarts. And as I stated earlier, that little foreshadowing went straight over my head. It was literally so subtle, but also fuck Arabin for selling her out like that. I mean, obviously, I don't want Dorian to die, but this makes it even more abundantly clear that Arabin really can't be trusted and is always just making different plays to keep everyone on their toes.
Oh, yeah. I remember when he said that about the pear tarts, I felt just the slightest twinge in my mind, but I was just so immersed in what was happening that I didn't dwell on it. But then that scene where Aelin's waiting and she's talking about all the delicious food and she talks about a tray of pear tarts. I was like, Arabin talked about those fucking pear tarts. And I was like, no, but I couldn't put it together until it all was revealed.
Yeah. Nesryn calls Aelin out for lying, but she calls them fools, and the Valg hisses, "You will regret this moment, girl," before Aelin grabs Aedion and runs. I obviously have a strong feeling that this will come back to bite them in the ass later. They're gonna have another run-in with Dorian / this Valg prince. Also, Chaol and Nesryn really don't know how dire the situation really was, like, at all. The two of them would have died against a Valg prince, and the only reason Aelin had a chance at all was because she knew to draw word marks. It was just a very crazy scene, but of course, I did wonder, as I stated earlier, what happened to Nesryn. I'm assuming she got away, but
you're absolutely right. Chaol and Nesryn have no fucking clue what they're up against. And I think that is abundantly clear in this scene. It's unfortunate because I think if Chaol and Nesryn had any experience, they would not be so harsh on Aelin for wanting to kill Dorian. One, to release whatever part of Dorian's soul still exists. And two, because of the absolute insane danger that a Valg Dorian poses.
Next, they're still on the run. They make it over the garden wall and into the streets where Aelin ensures a struggling Aedion that they just had 4 more blocks to go. And making it this far was a miracle in itself. Hashtag thanks, Mala.
I'm going to start incorporating that into my daily life. Thanks Mala.
Yeah.
I thought it was really funny as Aedion is thinking this is a miracle. Aelin interrupts his thoughts by barking, "Hurry, you hulking ass." And I was like, God damn, he's trying, okay? He's been in prison. He has a giant slice in his side.
Girl, you gotta be a little patient with him. He's injured. Aedion briefly thinks that this was all some hallucination. It had to be. No one would have actually been stupid enough to try to rescue him, and especially not his own queen. But then they make it to the carriage where Lysandra was waiting for them. Honestly, the more I think about it, it is pretty freaking crazy that they managed to make it out alive and get back to her apartment in the end.
Oh, yeah. At no point did I think this was going to be successful. I really thought we were going to get captured, taken back to the glass castle, and we were going to have to fight our way out. Like, for real.
At least, like, one person in this mission is going to get captured. But the fact that none of them did, as far as we know of, literally is a miracle.
Thanks, Mala.
Thanks, Mala. Thanks, Mom. So massive and injured Aedion gets the short end of the stick and he gets shoved in the bench compartment of the carriage while Aelin wipes off the blood and makeup and then changes into her next disguise with Lysandra's help. They are actually stopped by some guards and inspected, but they make it through, which made me very happy because fuck them guards, okay?
I think you and I are feeling very spicy tonight. I'm like,
I
fuck
know.
that pear tart, fuck Arabin, fuck them guards. You know what? Fuck this whole set of chapters, okay?
The carriage turns down a narrow alley where they transfer Aedion and Aelin to another carriage where Chaol takes them in and Lysandra promises to meet them later. I was a little curious as to how much of this plan was Arabin's versus Aelin and Lysandra's. I'm sure once they got out of the castle, they were also trying to avoid any of Arabin's men because I'm sure they were watching and I'm sure they would be reporting back to Arabin. But I've also been curious to see when Arabin is going to figure out that Aelin and Lysandra are working together against him. I think he probably is going to figure that out.
That's true. Because, I mean, he has eyes on Aelin all the time. So he would have known when Lysandra would have went to visit the second time. Like the first time he sent her, but the second time you think he would have been like, what were you doing at Aelin's apartment? That's interesting. To be honest, overall, I just keep waiting for the other shoe to drop and for Arabin to betray them all. That's really what I'm waiting for.
Yeah. He's always that other thing you gotta consider.
Yes.
Like no plan is safe because Arabin is in the city being a creeper watching and keeping tabs on everything. So
yeah, you might get got. Do you remember that from one of our TOG episodes?
Yes.
You just get got.
Yeah.
Aww. I wish I could go back and listen to those, but they're still too cringe. I can't do it. I listened to our intro episode and I wanted to die. It was so cute and sweet and we were such babies and we had no idea what we were doing. Oh my God. It's so cute.
They make it to Aelin's warehouse apartment where finally the weight of everything that had just occurred finally hits her as she heads to her bathroom for a bath. Later on, Chaol and Aelin discuss the events in a tense discussion. Aelin points out, next time you decide you don't trust me, try not to prove it at a time when my life or Aedion's is on the line. While Chaol points out, you tried to kill him. You said you tried to get him out to help him, and you tried to kill him. So things are not great between them right now. Again.
Yeah. Again, surprise. I actually really loved Aelin's response, and she says, you know what I did? I gave him 1 minute. I gave up 1 minute of my escape to him. Do you understand what can happen in 1 minute? Because I gave one to Dorian when he attacked Aedion and me today to capture us. I gave him a minute in which the fate of my entire kingdom could have changed forever. I chose the son of my enemy. And I was like, damn. She fucking told Chaol the business. And I'm glad that she did. That last sentence just really punches you in the gut. I chose the son of my enemy. And she did over her entire kingdom. I like this quote because I don't think I have ever really considered the risk she took in stopping to assess Dorian. She truly, and I mean truly, risked it all.
True.
And I don't think Chaol is really appreciating or understanding that. I think similarly, as you mentioned earlier, Nesryn and Chaol really don't have a fundamental understanding of how perilous that situation is, like how truly dangerous the Vowed Prince is. And I think the sentiment is echoed later when she tells Chaol that Dorian is gone forever. She needed him to understand the risk she'd taken and the danger he'd let Arabin manipulate him into putting her in. He had to know where there was a hard line that she must draw and that she would hold to protect her own people. And I think this is very appropriate of Aelin to make Chaol understand her limitations that are very reasonable, might I add. Okay? But, of course, as a Chaol defender, I just have to give him just a tiny little bit of slack on his reaction here because ultimately, I think he is processing and grieving the idea that his lifelong best friend / brother is dead. And so I think a lot of that conversation is emotionally charged. He's just gotten quite possibly the worst news. And then you add in the other element of Dorian is his path to redemption. And then he's just like literally having a nervous breakdown. So what he said was not excusable, but I think the circumstances make me understand why he is reacting so hostilely. That's not right. Hostile in such a hostile manner.
Yes, that's a good point. The argument continues as Aelin defends herself by stating she had risked pausing to see if Dorian was in there before ultimately deciding killing him was necessary since anyone with common sense would because Dorian is gone. We know the real decision Chaol will be faced with is who he will serve given the state of Dorian, and Aelin rightly asks, you're going to have to decide soon whom you serve, because the Dorian you knew is gone forever. Ardalin's future does not depend on him anymore. I, as I've said many times, don't like that this is the decision that it comes down to, but as far as Aelin could tell, she truly couldn't see any part of Dorian still left inside. Plus, they also still have no idea how to remove a Valg from a host without killing the host. Chaol also wasn't there to witness all of this, but he really does need to understand what the hard decision ultimately is. We also know that this Valg will be coming back for them. And now even more people are at risk because of Aelin's connection to Chaol, Lysandra, and so many other people now. Plus, similar to how much Chaol wants to defend his kingdom, Aelin ultimately now has to do the same. And Dorian, as an infected Valg prince in line to take the throne, is a huge risk to every other kingdom and country.
Oh, that's really interesting thought. It's not just her and the lives of people in Rifthold, but like literally everyone.
Yeah.
Literally the entire world.
Well, it's a continuation of what the king already is, right? It's just
True.
that people are now realizing what the king is doing. Now you have double the chance of the king's plan coming to fruition, because even if the king dies, Dorian's now infected, and if Dorian becomes the throne, now you have another person. So you have two people with a similar agenda. Obviously, like, Dorian's not at fault because Dorian doesn't believe it, but there's not much the true Dorian can do right now to combat what's happened to him. So
Poor Dorian.
I know. So eventually the conversation ends and Chaol takes watch on the roof, leaving Aelin and Lysandra to talk. Lysandra is very clever, so she realizes who Aelin really is, but Aelin also informs her that Arobynn had always known who she was. Aelin assures Lysandra she knew she would have to tell her the moment they were seen in a room together, but that it would change nothing between them. Ultimately, the tension between both of them eases when Lysandra makes a light joke to say, even though he's a handsome bastard, it'd be like kissing you. And I was like, ooh, Lysandra and Aedion.
Uh-huh.
Should that become a thing, would you approve, Addison? Can't have Aedion if Lysandra comes into play.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I did wonder about that because she brought up kissing him kind of out of nowhere. And I was like, girl, nobody was even thinking about that. Why are you okay? But to answer your question, maybe we can. I mean, Lysandra does sound pretty hot and funny, and she loves chocolate. So I don't know how to make a couple's name with 3 people. That's too complex. I can't do that. That's out of my wheelhouse.
Wow, look at you. Turning this into a throuple.
Oh, I hate that word. I don't know why. That gives me the ick. I've heard it before, but like, I didn't like that. I rescind what I said. I'll fight Lysandra for him. Okay. In all seriousness, somehow Lysandra went from a mildly annoying background character to one of my favorites, actually. I'm really enjoying her quite a bit.
I like her too so far. She stands her own, but she is equally as helpful. You know, she's like getting in there and like coming up with a lot of plans. And I'm assuming a lot of her disguises and everything. Well, actually, it literally did say that Lysandra was the one that told her about changing how she moves and changing her appearance and all of that stuff. So clearly, she is very helpful to their cause. And I think just her personality and friendship for Aelin is going to be an added bonus. Moving on to chapter 20. We check back in to Morath and we change to Elite's perspective as she heads to the Eyrie. Elite has been in Morath for 2 months now, and it had been several days since her encounter with Manon while cleaning her room. Having to fend for herself, Elite had learned to sweet talk and flatter as a weapon in her arsenal. It was considered a gift from Anith, the Lady of Wise Things, something she used to get healing herbs for her foot from the cook. Anith is one of several goddesses we've learned about, and apparently death by her hands was brutal, bloody, and slow, and she was expecting her death soon at the hands of the witches, the Duke, or any of the other lethal soldiers prowling around.
I also thought it was funny when Elite thinks bracing herself for the beast and the monsters who rode them. And it's funny because most people would see the wyverns and call them monsters, you know, sharp teeth and claws and all that. but instead she's calling them beast and the witches monsters. But I mean, hey, she's not wrong.
I know. She may very well become a monster herself.
Mm.
Aedion had been passed off a letter for Manon from a sweaty weasel of a man, which did not surprise her because her quote, most men, she decided, were bastards of varying degrees. Most of them were monsters, none worse than Vernon. And now that we know that Aedion is a witch, I started kind of just picking up on the way that she describes things, and the language of how she notices and describes what she sees feels honestly pretty similar to Manon at times. Her words were not sweaty weasel. I used that, but if you look at the description of how she described the man that gave her this letter, it's so like, it just sounds a lot like how Manon sounds. And so I found that kind of funny. But
I'm gonna have to look out for that next time in their chapters.
Yeah. We also learned the following about Aedion's past and other info. So the map Aedion had studied in Manon's room was of Morath and the surrounding area, and it confirmed that they were indeed kind of in the middle of nowhere. Aedion had also been sent off with Vernon when she was 8, and by the time Orinth was seized, she'd been locked in a tower at Parenth's castle, and Vernon had seized her father's title, which is actually technically her title now.
Yeah, this background gave me a lot of pause. I really have to wonder why the hell her father would have given her to Vernon. I know in its most base sense, he was just trying to protect her, right? I'm sure Chaol knew what was about to happen, but he had to have known how awful his brother was and that he was in the king's pocket. The way that Vernon is described is he's always been like that. So,
yeah,
I mean, maybe he didn't, but I am very curious about his decision making here. There's also a description of Aedion leaning into the breeze, and she thinks about how she once only had the wind for company, and it says she could have sworn it sang ancient songs to lull her into sleep. She then describes the wind in Morath as colder and sleeker, serpentine almost. We know that Aedion has witch blood, and I wonder if this is some hint at the magic in her blood or that she may very well possess. Hearing, the song sing to you in an ancient way or kind of an elemental vibe, it just feels very witchy and very magic oriented. And so I do wonder if she has magic because, well, I guess 2 things. 1, she wouldn't really know because magic is gone in Aurelia. And 2, it calls back to that conversation in Heir of Fire between Ro and Evelyn that Aelin overhears as a child. They're talking about Cal and Marion, and they're thinking about they're going to send Aedion to school. And I was wondering, I'm like, were they going to send her to a magic school, which means maybe she did know she has magic? I don't know. I want to know about Aedion and the witch blood and her heritage and the magic and all that. That's really becoming a pressing need for me to know.
Yes, I actually had a thought about that later, about why her ankles are chained.
Oh,
when we get there. But aside from that, the call out to the fact that she is drawn to how the wind sounds and how it sings to her is a really interesting thing. So that was a good call out. To continue on with what we learn, in a few weeks, when the next caravan of supplies were delivered, Aedion had planned to hide in one of the wagons as it left and ultimately try and escape. I do like that she has a plan, but I also think it's going to take a lot more than just hiding in a wagon to get out of more. So,
yeah, I would agree with that as well. I don't think it's going to be quite that simple.
Aedion was also aware of the screams and darker things that happened under the mountains and was glad she never encountered whatever was being broken and pieced together beneath the earth. Her thoughts are interrupted by none other than the white-haired witch herself, and Manon demands to know why she was there if she wasn't a spy. Aedion immediately begins to stutter and then hands Manon the letter she'd been tasked with giving her. Through Manon's questioning, we learn that Aedion cannot read since her lesson stopped at the age of 8, though her nursemaid, Finula, had taught her how to, quote, take note of things, to listen, and to think. This was actually really sad to learn. Everything had changed about Aedion's life and education when Terrasen had fallen, so she never got a chance to learn how to read, which I was like, no.
What is it with SJM and characters who can't read?
Oh my God, right.
That's all I have to say. Right. No spoilers, but I was like, you just always gotta throw someone in there who can't read.
Honestly, SJM, once you've read through all of her books and stuff, there are so many things that she kind of
Recycle.
takes. Yeah, she recycles a lot of stuff. Like the whole love of music, love of dance.
Yes, especially the love of dance. It calls to another character in another series.
Yes.
I think about that very frequently.
Characters who can't read. That's another thing we can add to the list of SDM things. But I also felt that Fionnuala sounds wonderful because she still tried to do whatever she could to help Aelid as much as possible.
So this is kind of a dumb thought and note, but it just really bothered me. I wrote it and erased it and wrote it and erased it. And I was like, I'm just going to say it here, okay? And let me just clarify. I taught for almost a decade. I taught reading. I taught children to read in an elementary school setting. So I feel I'm a little bit of an authority on this. And I'm not talking about kids that have learning differences. Okay, I'm talking about like the average child. I don't know anything about the education system in Terracin, but to be 8 years old and only know her letters is insane. Okay, my 5-year-old can read, and I would say she's probably above average performance-wise. But that is not uncommon for kindergartners to be able to read, 5-year-olds. So why did she not know how to read by the age of 8? Hopefully when Aelin takes the throne, she can revamp the education system there because it ain't cutting it.
They had different priorities, I guess. But
apparently,
you're right. It would have been much more helpful to her if she had been taught to read earlier.
Yes. Yes.
That was the age of 8, which is exactly when Terracin fell.
Well, especially considering that she's the heir to Parenth, which is a major position. So you would think that her training would have been much more intensive and her education much more vast. So that is a little world building thing that does not fit and annoys me.
Good point. Very unhelpful. To continue, Manon instructs her to bring anything with the letters that said Manon Blackbeak to her and then calls out her fake stuttering and her plan to escape. Manon had seen right through Aelid's facade from the very beginning, but through her questioning, we also learn more about Aelid's parents. So Aelid's mother, Lady Marion, had been low-born as a laundress, and her family had been from Rosamel, which is northwest of Terracin. I did find it interesting that Aelid even notices that it was weird for Manon to be asking about her parents and who was related to Vernon and everything, as well as just her general interest in her family at all. We know that Manon knows Aelid has witch blood, though Aelid doesn't know this about herself, apparently. Based on this and Manon's thoughts later, we know Manon was questioning her about her parents, likely to figure out how Aelid has witch blood in the first place, I would assume.
I agree.
I'm also assuming that this means Lady Marion was a witch or carried witch lineage because we know witches are all born female and being a witch is passed on via the female bloodline in general. So, I mean, I don't think it would come from her dad's side, right?
No, I don't think so. It calls into question a lot about witch culture and just how the world works. We can assume that she's not an Iron Teeth witch because they stick with their covens. So if she was a full-blooded witch, magical witch, then she would have been a Kraken in hiding, which is possible, but seems unlikely. So then it makes me wonder, can you be part witch? I don't know. I'm still a little confused about overall how witches are born and magic is passed down and all of that. So I'm assuming that will be explored and explained, but it is confusing.
I don't even really technically feel like there is a difference between Krakens and Valg as far as genetics go. Or not Valg,
Yeah,
sorry.
maybe just the blue blood.
Because Krakens and Iron Teeth, I guess they do have different blood. But, I mean, they're both technically 50-50 on Fae versus
I guess. I don't
Valg.
know. I would really like Ghislaine to just give me a little download on how it works.
I know, it was not sufficient.
Well, because Manon fucked it up with her dumb eyes glazing over. I have a comment about that when we get there. I was very annoyed.
All right, well, we're almost there. So a huge roar from Abraxos interrupts them, and Aelid accurately perceives the affection Manon has for him, noting her mount must make her happy, that if witches could be happy, which I thought was funny. Abraxos huffs into Manon's hand, but then meets Aelid's eyes and sniffs out the chains around her ankles. Shortly after, he lays his head on the ground and looks at up at her dog-like. Okay, so I don't know why this was the place where I had this epiphany, but what if the chains that Elite has been wearing are actually to contain her magic? I don't think it specifies what they are made from, but if her uncle had put them on her, I am inclined to believe he knows she is magical. But if this turns
Oh.
out to be true, then the question is, did he do it to protect her, or did he do it to keep her intentionally contained? Is he doing it because he was bad, or was he actually doing that because he was trying to protect her and he's maybe potentially a not as bad person? But that only depends on if this thought of mine is true.
First of all, I think he's bad. I don't think he's doing it to protect her. Second of all, it is interesting that you point that out because we already know her ankle's messed up, so she really can't run away. So then why would you need to add chains to that as well? That is a little bizarre that they did that. Not to mention, even if her ankle was perfectly fine and she had no chains, what are the odds of her making it out of, I guess, a castle, I don't know, out of Morath, the Duke's palace, whatever, his house, okay, and then anywhere meaningful? That is kind of strange now that you mention it.
Yeah, and I do think Abraxas was examining them and recognized that Elite was in the same position that he had once been.
Yeah.
But everything just kind of clicked. I was like, okay, Elite has magical witch blood in her. The fact that we know the king's men use iron to protect themselves in Heir of Fire. When Aelin and Rowan go to scope out Narok's men, they see all the iron everywhere. Dorian was taking iron to suppress his magic as well.
Yeah.
And then I was like, ooh, if we figure out that these chains are made of iron, then I would be like very sure that it was to keep Elite's magic contained. So it's also important to note that Elite notices how Manon chose Abraxos despite him being smaller, and she figures that perhaps Manon had a soft spot for broken things and would spare her as well. I kind of feel like this may be some foreshadowing for an alliance or something that's going to take place between Elite and Manon. At bare minimum, it feels like Manon is probably not going to hurt Elite. Or that's kind of my sense so far. So.
Yeah.
Elite also asks how they exist, referring to the wyverns, and Manon informs her that the king of Otterland made them, though she didn't know how. Elite follows this question with the thought of how she had heard of wyverns and dragons and seen glimpses of the little folk and the fae. I would just like to say we haven't heard about dragons in quite a long time, but now that they've been mentioned again, I do really hope that we get dragons in the mix here at some point.
I get so excited whenever a character makes a distinction between the dragons and the wyverns, because at this point, I've just assumed the wyverns are meant to fill the space of what a dragon would in this book. But then when they mention the difference, I'm like, oh, whoa. Are there dragons out there somewhere? Please, please.
Yes, the ears perk up.
Right, exactly.
And then Elite also points out that Abraxos, tail thumping like a giant lethal dog, did not seem evil. To which Manon responds, no. However he was made, something went wrong with that part. Their conversation ends with Manon and Abraxos leaving to hunt, but not before he perceives the wince and pain from Elite as she jumped out of their way. Manon realizes that Elite had no idea about her witch lineage, but proceeds to open the letter she'd been given. The letter, of course, is a threat from Granny, warning her to obey or face punishment, and that 3 Yellowleg and 2 Blueblood covens would be arriving the next day. Naturally, she was expected to ensure there were no fights between the clans. Manon is then suddenly overwhelmed with the memory of what the Kronkin witch had told her about how they'd been made to turn into monsters, but didn't stick around to think more about it.
She never does. She would think about that later.
Yep. Later on, Manon meets with Ghislaine, the resident reader and source of information amongst the 13. Buckle up, folks, because there was a lot of information exchanged in this section. Although, as we stated earlier, we of course still have more questions.
Yeah, I don't feel like anything new was introduced here. I feel like it was just confirmed and it was a nice refresher, but there wasn't anything that I was like, It was pretty much what Baba told Aelin back in Calm. So
Ghislaine was the eldest and cleverest of the group and was also an unprecedented exception to the coven. Her mother had convinced the High Witch to allow her to be sent to a mortal school in Terrasen where she learned magic and book things and whatever else mortals were taught. Ghislaine had then returned 12 years later, much different, aka more human. I was thinking that this has to be the same magic school that Alid was almost sent to. But of course, I want to know why Ghislaine would have been sent there if she already, as a witch, had magic, right?
well, I think the school was to teach kids to train their magic.
Right. But then why wouldn't all witches do something like that too? Why not just keep them with the witches in general? Why did her mom be like, you need to go to this school, you know?
Yeah, I think Ghislaine seems to have a proclivity for wanting to learn about the world through books. And most witches don't have that. So maybe it was a way to encourage her. And also, I mean, we were just getting introduced to Ghislaine. So maybe there was like some secret mission and she was there actually to find something else out specifically. I mean, you could go a lot of different directions with that.
True.
To answer your other question, I think in general, the witches don't fuck with mortals. They don't like them. They don't want to be around them. They're just
Right.
basically prey for them. And so that's why most of them don't go to normal mortal schools, witches stick with their own unless they're hunting.
Ghislaine gives Manon a quick history of the Valg and witches, and here is a brief recap for everyone as well. So, a millennia ago, the Valg had broken into the world. At the time, it was the Valg, the Fae, and the humans. The Valg were demons who wanted the world to themselves, so they bred with the Fae to ensure their offspring could survive in this world. The offspring became what is now known as the witches, with the Iron Teeth taking after the Valg and the Krakens getting more of the Fae traits. So, once the war was over, the people didn't want the witches in that area, but King Brannon didn't feel that it was right to push them out entirely, so he gave the witches the Western Wastes. And then the Witch Wars later on put the Iron Teeth into exile once again.
The witches are their own worst enemies, it seems.
But like it.
I know I joked about this earlier, but damn it, Manon and her stupid glazed eyes. When Ghislaine was like, and because your eyes are getting that glazed look, I'm just going to jump to the end and say the offspring became us. I was like, no, tell us everything. God. Freaking Manon.
Every time.
She really is like, tell me the most relevant information right now and don't bore me with the details. And I'm like, okay, but the details sometimes tell us things. Sometimes the details are important.
Yeah, and they matter because obviously if Ghislaine hasn't told her about this stuff, she would have went right along with Duke's plan and like given up a Blackbeak coven. And I'm like,
girl.
Ghislaine also states that though the witches were wicked, the Valg are the origin of evil. They are the blackness and despair incarnate. She also warns Manon against allying with them because the Valg had no laws or codes and would see the 13 as something to break for amusement. Ghislaine was also of the opinion that should anyone find a way to send the Valg back to where they came from, they should. And I perked up a little bit at that because I was like, could this be foreshadowing for a Wit/Aelin Galathinius alliance in the future?
Oh, you think so? Whoa, okay.
Well, Aelin seems to be the one who's fated to defeat the Valg ultimately, so...
True. That would be very interesting. I would love that.
We'll see. It also turns out that Ghislaine could sense the off smell of the soldiers and correctly deduces that the king had found out how to put the Valg in human body.
And somehow Manon hadn't put that together. For crying out loud. When Manon says that, she's like, well, I hadn't thought that far. I'm like, girl, what are you doing all day, every day? For someone who's supposed to be, in my opinion, sort of the fated witch, you know, probably will bring the witches together and all that, she sure is not the most critical thinker. Okay, I'm not saying she's not smart.
Asking enough questions.
Oh my God, no, she is not. Manon in that conversation also goes on to say the Duke described them as allies, and Ghislaine responds, that word does not exist for the Valg. They find the alliance useful, but will honor it only as long as it remains that way. And this to me confirms a thought and a conversation you and I have had many times. How is it possible that the king is controlling them and can maintain that control more importantly? I'm sure there's some element of control he has through word stones or whatever power he has, but it does confirm for me, and I think probably you too, that as soon as the king has served his purpose, the Valg will likely dispose of him. The king is a means to an end for them. And I think Ghislaine's thought here really confirms that. And so I think the king is an idiot for thinking he could invite them in and control them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Manon confides in Ghislaine about the Duke's request to breed Valg with the Blackbeak Coven, and Ghislaine asks if she plans to obey. Manon didn't know as she leaves Ghislaine's room. The next morning, Manon discovers that all the witches had heard of the Duke's request and the choice she was tasked with making. And breakfast was very tense, to say the least. Eventually, a Yellowlegs coven approaches Manon to request she consider them for the Duke's task because they hope that they could earn a different sort of glory for themselves instead of being subjected to the usual drudgery work as was the way of their clans. Later on, Manon informs the Duke she'd chosen the Yellowlegs coven for his experiment, but he insists on Blackbeaks. It seems the combo with Ghislaine had left doubts in Manon's mind, even if it meant getting a warning from the Duke. Before she leaves, she asks, why do all of this? Why ally with the Valg? Why raise this army? Notably, the Duke says, because we can, and because this world has too long dwelled in ignorance and archaic tradition. It is time to see what might be improved.
Oh yeah, this whole little part of the chapter, this whole description, it just screamed to me, the Duke is long gone and being fully operated by a Valg, right? And Manon dwells in this as well, where he says, this world. Who would say that? Someone who's not from that world, right? And so that just screamed to me that Duke Parrington, the human, gone.
Ain't the Duke.
Ain't the Duke. Ain't no way.
Obviously, this leaves Manon disturbed, and she wonders if Granny had considered that one day they might have to fight to keep the waste from the very men who had helped them take back their home. All I gotta say is thank God she finally listened to the instincts of the 13 and herself rather than just being freaking obedient for no reason, because this is not the time, and the Valg are definitely just using the witches as a means to an end.
Oh, absolutely. And I am very terrified to see what will come of this witch attempt at breeding. I'm very concerned.
I'm concerned, but I'm also kind of curious.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Fair. Totally fair.
All right. So that ends chapter 20. And now we are on our final chapter, chapter 21. This one was very short.
And sad. Very sad.
And sad. So here's my analysis. I titled it, A Day in the Mind of a Valg-Infected Host. Step 1, remember someone looks familiar. Step 2, get wrestled back into submission by the Valg Prince. Step 3, sob with relief that he would finally be free. Step 4, watch in despair as the turquoise-eyed woman gets interrupted and does not behead him. Step 5, refuse to remember her name even when questioned because he is still Dorian deep down. Step 6, wish she had killed him and hated that she hadn't.
You should be a writer. That was Chef's Kiss. It was beautiful.
Thank you. But, oh my God. Again, I'm very happy to know that he is still in there, but also Dorian himself at this point doesn't believe that there's a solution and agreed with Aelin that the best course of action was for him to die because he knows how powerful the Valg are and what they would do if they continued on as they were. So, still holding out hope that he's going to survive, but time's running out.
Yeah. This chapter was really demoralizing. All of his chapters are right now, honestly. I know I said this in an earlier episode, but I really do wonder how much he can hold out. I know we said it in this episode. Basically, every time we talk about Dorian, we're like, how much longer can we withstand this? But I did think it was interesting when it said he could not remember her name, refused to remember her name, even as the man on the throne questioned him about the incident. And I feel like this, in some small way, is still Dorian trying to protect Aelin, which really just makes this chapter even more heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. That's the end of this episode. So see you later, guys.
Sorry to end on a sad note. But actually, we're not done. We still have our favorite moments to share.
So I first liked, in the very first chapter of this set, when Nesryn, Chaol, and Aelin are getting ready to rescue the prisoners. And Aelin says, And I think those streamers would look better with some Val blood on them anyway. And then the rescue begins.
This is one example of her bloodthirstiness, actually,
Yeah, I did like that. I was like, yeah.
being in a way that I was like, yes, I agree with this. So, so one of my first quotes was, if these were her last moments, then at least she would go down fighting to the sound of exquisite music.
Our girl loves music for show. Yeah. I also like when they're going into the glass castle and she thinks they weren't stopped or questioned by anyone else, so the guards in every hall watched them like hawks and not the shape-shifting Fey prince kind. And so it's just a nice little nod to Rowan. Yeah. I think SGM was like, don't worry, he still exists. I know I wrote a whole book about him, but he will come back.
Hopefully soon. And similarly, in that chapter, my other favorite quote was when Aedion's describing Aelin and how she sticks out from the dancers. And he's like, she moved like a swaggering man, parading for the ladies around him.
The way they describe each other is just so funny. I'm like, what is happening? I know we talked about that a lot, but it's still funny every time I think about it.
I think so too.
I really do. In the same chapter, as she's getting ready to go in and getting ready to start the rescue, she gives herself a little pep talk and she thinks she was the heir of fire. She was fire and light and ash and embers. She was Aelin Fireheart and she bowed for no one and nothing save the crown that was hers by blood and survival and triumph. And I was like, whoo! That literally gave me chills. SJM just does these really incredible, I don't know, these little like few sentences that just freaking punch you with feeling. And you're like, oh! Yeah, I don't know.
It brought me back to Heir of Fire, Aelin, and not Aelin, Celaena Sardothien, and Queen of
Yes, yeah.
But my last favorite quote that I liked was from chapter 19, and it was also just a real funny one from Lysandra when she takes care of Aedion, and then she comes out and she's like, even though he's a handsome bastard, it'd be like kissing you. And yeah, that now ends all of our favorite moments, and that concludes our episode. So thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Book Dump Fantasy Podcast. As always, we are so glad you found us, so please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and check out our social media pages to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today, so stay nerdy.
And remember, you can't be punished for crimes you commit in your head.
We'll catch you all next week for Queen of Shadows, episode 4. Bye!
Bye! And stay tuned for some bloopers. I forgot what I was going to say. I was just like, and my brain was like, yes, it was. That is a great question. Where's the show outline?
Oh, oops, I didn't move it. Damn it.
Yeah,
I made a copy.
okay.
It's in 8 through 13.
I thought you were doing that from memory, and I was like, wow.
How are you doing that? No,
that was amazing.
Got to put it in the right way.
She's back. Damn, that's what I should have put in the summary. Damn it.
She was Aelin Fireheart, and she bowed for no. Oh my god, I can't speak either today. How do we say that? Annie.
Annie. Yeah, that's what I would think. Yeah, like Annie.
I'll just
Annie.
Try that. Annie. Okay. The Lady of Wise Things. Something she used to get healing herbs for her foot from the gut.
I was thinking if you said the Lady of Wide Things. Wide things.
Should I say it again? Did it sound really? Is that what it sounded like?
Yeah. You should say it. You should
Okay.
do it again. Also, we were laughing too hard.